So how are you doing, Robert?
Oh no, I'm doing great. Doing great. How you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
How long has it been since we've talked?
I have to check my video. Been a while. Been a while. So what you guys been up to?
Oh, just doing end time stuff and truth and all that kind of stuff. You
Oh,
know.
only that. Okay.
Try to always hit up the end times content, right? But yeah, how I've seen I think we're ready to go on the camera. I've seen The Carpenter's Son and a bunch of other great podcasts that you've been doing. His grasp and understanding of the parabolic keys is just great to hear. I was blown away at his understanding and his capability to speak it. Has he been
Yeah, that's what
involved?
I like to see. I mean, it just comes from within. You recognize something and you build on that.
Yeah.
He's just really into it.
Yeah, I love his enthusiasm. He's studying it out real hard. You guys didn't really actually get into breaking down the scriptures during the podcast, but you guys went so many places. It was the most recent one that you guys did. It was a great podcast. I did like it. What have you been pushing the boundaries on? What have you been up to lately, Robert?
Honestly, it's just been listening. I've been listening to the Gospel of Truth and to the Gospel of Philip and to the Gospel of Thomas, just sort of ad nauseum. Trying to piece it all together in my head and see you know. But it's mostly been along those lines.
Now, for me, I'm constantly going through basically almost every book that you have, plus other ones. There's a few that you don't have that you actually have in the Super Gospel. So if people don't know Robert's website, it's in the description box, the spiritual-truth.com. On there, he has a compilation of there's MP3 files, there's PDFs, there's videos, and you've compiled. Is it 18 hours long? The Super Gospel, you wrote a book compiling all the extra canonical books, and you
Yeah.
you seamlessly put them together chronologically, almost seamlessly. Is it 18 hours of content?
I think it's 16, but it's a lot. It's about the same length as if you read the entire New Testament from beginning to end. Um, and again, the whole reason why I wrote this is I've explained probably about a million times, but it's just I wanted some framework. I was putting this stuff together in my head, and I was like, because I wanted to see if it all fit and it all jived together. I took and I pieced it together. I mean, literally made copies, cut them out, laid them on columns, and integrated them. And when I saw that that worked for the infancy gospels, I thought, well, I should proceed with this. But it was all back in the 90s, and I never even thought to publish it. That was just a personal study, which is like so many of the other things that I do. It just starts out as a personal study, and it's just wherever it takes me, And that's why I feel like everybody out there who's part of the elect, they got to have that one-to-one sort of like relationship where God calls them and they give them a talent. He gives them a talent or he gives them a calling or something. It's all very custom. You know what I'm saying? So each one of us is contributing something to the entire puzzle. But when it speaks of the children who are to come at the end of time, when it speaks of um, the elect, it's speaking of us collectively, that we're all sort of gifted differently and will be given different things to contribute, but then take them and shout them, if you will, from the rooftops, here at the end of time.
You know, Go ahead,
Can I
Jason. Yeah,
can
you
I
can.
jump in? So, Robert, um, there's one thing I would like to pick your brain on tonight,
Sure.
and I just want to let you know that when people come to us and ask us questions like this, what we do is we say go to scriptural-truth.com
Right.
and see what's been published there. So the question was posed by Seth, one of the people that pay attention to the content here, and so the Council of Nicaea 325 is when they took out a whole bunch of books from what we call the canon now, and the question was posed like, how many books do you really think were removed from the canon where 325, like these 66 books pass, and how many script like books, like, so I know that we would have to like define what is a book and what's a verse and a logian and all these kinds of things, but do you have any sort of like off the cuff response as far as how many books we might be missing right now?
I think we're at a loss to even guess. I think what it was, and this is my opinion, because people have this very sort of, I think, narrowly defined idea of what is canon and what's not. I don't really like even the concept of a canon, because again, I say this pretty much every time I talk to anybody. It really boils down to the underlying language as to whether a book is inspired or not. It has to do with the passing on or passing forward of the mystery. I don't think that I have any idea, and I don't think anybody has any idea, just quote unquote, how many books there were to choose from, because I believe that the Spirit went out across the world, and that there were prophets everywhere, and that they were recorded and that they wrote down and stuff. And what gets passed down to us, I think, is for us to discern spiritually. Like, we have no idea. Most of the documents that we have, like if we want to pedigree them or we want to, somehow contextualize them into history or something, I think we can nail that down to a certain extent, but there's always a huge level of uncertainty. Like even with the Gospel of Thomas, there are people who look at it and they say, well, internally, I could date this book to like 50, maybe AD or something like that. And there are other people who say, no, it's much later. It's 100, 150, maybe even later than that. You know what I'm saying? The scholars are all over the place on things like that. I don't know of any specific number of books that we are quote unquote missing. I think that many things come crawling out of the woodwork. Like I know a few decades back, another gospel sort of came out of the woodwork called Codex. I think it was 2220. Don't quote me on that, but it's called the Gospel of the Savior. You know what I'm saying? I was able to read enough of that. It's very fragmentary. I felt like I could understand it, I could decode it, and that it decoded like a lot of the rest of the books, that we go through and we try to understand on that deeper level.
All right.
So I think
I'm not trying to put you on the spot with this at all, but it's so as far as scriptures that you've gone through, you've seen that there's texts that have been concealed from us. How many of these have you felt safe, like putting out there, that these scriptures you feel with a certain amount of confidence have the keys to the kingdom encoded within them, and they check out and they're not confrontational to other scriptures?
I think most of the ones I read have validity to them. I believe that they decode for the most part. Most of the ones that I've read, but I'm talking about books that largely come in these tomes, like the New Testament Apocrypha, the Old Testament Apocrypha. Things have been passed down to us through scholarly, translation or whatever. I think if you're asking what percentage are valid and what percentage are squirrely, let's say, or whatever, I think it's hard to put your finger on. I usually break books down into two categories: things that I can explain and things that I can't explain. You know what I'm saying? And things that follow the pattern and things that don't follow the pattern. And I don't know that I could point to any one particular book that I would put as just beyond the pale, like absolutely could not be. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that some people might find harder to believe than others, or harder to understand than others. And I feel like I'm the same way. There's a lot of things that I can look at it and I can say I can see some of this, but I can't see all of this. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know that I'm in a position to say which ones or how many or anything like that. It's hard for me to particularize. I can vouch for something like the Gospel of Thomas because I can explain it, and because literally you see the universality of it. The way that what I learned in the Gospel of Truth jives with what I've learned in the Gospel of Thomas, jives with what I've learned in the Gospel of John, etc. It's a matter of agreement. It's a matter of the unitary thought, and this is like the recurring theme about making the two one. See, this is one of the great big themes in the Gospel of Thomas. It's about people. People came up to Yeshua and asked him, "Hey, can you tell my brothers to divide my inheritance with me?" and he says, well, who's made me a divider? The idea is that this isn't about division. This is about unity. This is like a unitary thought. And I think as long as the teaching agrees with the unitary thought, it carries with it the validity and the inspiration of the original message. That message got lost in time, that message got covered up, that the keys were taken by the scribes, the Pharisees, the lawyers, whatever, and buried and hidden and taken away and kept from, our understanding or whatever, is like the common underlying theme, that the way that these books are recognized is through the understanding and through the decoding. Not necessarily that we can necessarily point to this and say that this is valid historically, or that this is valid because it came from that hand, or this is valid because it came up through these channels or whatever, but it's valid because it carries with it the higher level meaning. And as long as you can demonstrate what is that particular higher level meaning, then the book has value, and the book contributes because it is written according to the same overarching spirit.
Well, it was said, right, that how can you, discern the sky and know when it's going to rain, but you can't look into a book and tell whether or not those words are inspired. Like if you...
Well, again, where we I'm trying to remember where we left off. It was somewhere around 18, 19, 20 in the Gospel of Thomas. But up until that point, we had discussed a few basic topics that I think it's important to understand. First of all, the first thing it says of itself is that it's hidden, right? So you have what is open and what is hidden. What is open is understood as a fleshly level, surface level, and what is hidden is that which is designed for us to rediscover at some future time. And what I'm saying is that we now live in that time. And even as it speaks of in this gospel, he says, let me see if I can find it here. Hang on just a second. It says, seek and you will find. But the things that hang on a second.
And the other way to deal with the scriptures is we allow the Spirit to be inspired and written, and we allow man to be the liar. Like I'll stand up for a scripture many more times than I will stand against it. Including that you can actually match it up with other scriptures. They're parabolic meanings, and the way that they intertwine has to be there. You have to hear the poetic language. Those that hear the voice, they hear it. It doesn't matter who's writing it.
Those with ears, it's all about ears to hear and eyes to see. That's the key, is to try to replace one. It even says this in the Gospel of Thomas. When you replace an eye with an eye, or an ear with an ear, or a hand with a hand, right? It has to do with the way that you're seeing, right? Are you seeing things holistically as one big thing, as one giant teaching? Because see, that's the thing that allows you to transcend the canonical barriers and the thought barriers that exist out there that keep you from understanding the whole. Like I was saying before, about what's hidden is meant to be revealed, right? What is buried is meant to be raised. The idea of burial has to do with put under the earth, right? So if you're concealing the spiritual by the flesh, right? If you're concealing heavenly things in fleshly in fleshly terminology, it means that heavenly meaning is latent and inherent within those words, right? Which is why I'm convinced that this is in fact what we are supposed to teach. In fact, this is what it literally says that we should shout from the rooftops. Let me find that saying, and I'll get back to the other one here I was looking at before.
I just wanted to say quick, Robert, if there's anything you want to screen share, just let us know and we'll set up a screen share if you want to go through verses and stuff in that manner too. So just letting you know.
Yeah, this flow's okay.
Yeah, I'll let me see. Had it here. Hang on a second. Yeah, here. We were talking about replacing an ear with an ear, right? The ear that hears the fleshly level with an ear that hears the spiritual level. I mean, if you can recognize and make this discernment yourself, then you're already hearing on the second level. So anybody who's just listening to this, if you're just picking up on the higher level meaning, if you somehow grasp it and you hold on to it, then you will gain eyes to see and ears to hear. That is to say, what the Spirit is saying to the churches, really, to all of us, but to the whole, the church, the whole body of Christ. But that was the parable of the lamps. It says, what you will hear with one ear, listen to with both, then proclaim from your rooftops. That from your rooftops. I mean, so in other words, if one of your ears is fleshly, that is to say, it's hearing that which is on the surface, and you're seeing things just, in terms of the physical, whatever description that they're given, that's hearing with one ear, right? But when you hear with both ears, it means you hear on the level of the flesh and the level of the spirit, because the spirit is inherent in the flesh. The two are one, right? And so the idea is that you're taking those two and making them one thing. Like, for example, a lot of spiritual truths are given to us in the form of commandments and laws and things of that nature, because it speaks of laws as being shadows. And why? Because there's going to be a period where we will not know the truth. And during that period, we have to be, how should I say, we have to be controlled, if you will. So in other words, by couching spiritual things in earthly terms, you're able to, for the duration, give people a set of moral laws that they'll follow after the flesh, but that when they've been raised in their spirits, or like it says in the Ascension of Isaiah, when their spirits are turned upwards, when we finally transcend this fleshly existence and return to our eternal selves, our eternal nature, like as we saw the early apostles and Stephen, for example, doing, returning to his original state, which is where we are destined to be in the form of angels, as he speaks, that we shall be as the angels are in heaven. When we reach that point, when we become the beings of light that it talks about, this is at some future point, but that's when.
So could I just stop and get you to expound upon that a little bit, Robert? Because it's one of those interesting points that I think may go over the heads of many. And so you're talking about the nature of man and how it's changed, and how Stephen was changed, and how we're going to have like the nature of angels. And if you could go into a little bit of an in-depth as far as what the scriptures say,
well, yeah,
the
this is a
difference in nature
transition.
is.
Yeah, this is a transition from the temporal to the eternal. And the way that this is achieved, the way these books are a huge part of the way that we get to this point. It isn't just that it's these books in particular. It's the agreement between the language that's spoken in these books and the language that's spoken in what we accept as the canonical scriptures. There were mysteries that were laid down. This is why it's so tough to grapple with, because every single one of these things is a rabbit hole. These are riddles to be worked out, but there are threads between one and another and another and another, and these threads extend out and they cross all of the boundaries between the canonical and the non-canonical. And as long as people understand the underlying language, that is to say the spiritual that's couched within the physical, it is couched within the physical so as to hide the spiritual. And when the time comes for that spiritual to then rise up out of the physical, that is the triumph of the spirit over this realm. This is, it starts with the logos. And what that logos does is that it brings your spirit alive. See, that's one of the great recurring themes in here, between living and the dead, between the wealth and the poverty, between the light and the darkness, right? You see all of these things. Darkness is not knowing. In fact, this is the way the book starts out, that whoever comes to find the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. That means, that's a riddle. That means that the experience of death, quote unquote, is the lack of understanding of these words. And once you get it, once you see it, then that boundary is crossed, and you recognize that yes, the spiritual is couched within the physical. Well, and you're
Ronnie, hit the bell right now. Hit the bell. Bam, 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 bam. Ring a ding ding, ring a ding ding. So that right there, what you just said, if you go back and listen to it, Robert, you'll you might be amazed at how well you laid it down. But if you
Well-
could just relay it again, because it is really the takeaway of the night, in my opinion.
Well, it's the takeaway of all things. It's the idea of transcendence. Because the thing is, I'm trying to what I think we collectively at the end are given to do, right? What does it say to shout from the rooftops? I'm sitting here at 33 where it talks about the parable of the lamp. What you hear with one ear, and I'm reading out of a translation from Gospels.net. And I'm doing this because this is public domain. So people, if you want to use these are public domain translations there. It says, what you hear with one ear, listen to with both, and proclaim from your rooftops. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket or in a hidden place. Rather, they put it on the stand so that everyone who comes and goes can see its light. Now, there's a couple of things in here. We know that lampstands, represent the church. Because if you go through Revelation, it talks about the seven lampstands being the seven churches. So that's a given key. And the idea is that that no one lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel or under a basket or in a hidden place. That has to do with the idea that a basket is a container. Like the way that we canonize a document is we say, look, we put these boundaries around a certain set of books, a certain collection of books, and we call that a canon, but it's a container. And what it is that within the bounds of this container, we say that what is within this particular containment, if you will, what is within this particular volume or collection or canon of works is what we call scripture, what we call holy writ or whatever. And to put this under a basket, so to speak, or to hide it, if you will, is the idea that you can't contain it. You know what I'm saying? That you can't limit it, if you follow. Because once you hear with both of those ears, you then can shout it from the rooftops. You're able to unleash the light that is contained within the vessel, if you will. You're able to transcend that basket, if you will, that covers it up, that covers up the light. The fact that you're trying to contain it in any way, shape, form, or fashion is to obscure it. And once you recognize that, for example, I keep using this. I don't mean to beat it to death, but this is a key that's given to us to use so that we can put the bug in people's ears so they can start thinking about it. Again, you go back to Jude. Why is he crossing canonical boundaries and you're not? Why is he calling this book ancient and scholars are not? Why is he saying that this book is prophetic when he says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied? He cites the source of the book. He gives it its antiquity when he says that it's the seventh from Adam, and then he gives it the prophetic power, the power of prophecy by saying that he prophesied. So the scholar should take it as ancient, the theologian should take it as inspired, and yet we don't. So to your point, to let God be true and every man a liar, again, you have to do that. So whatever people have said, and again, we are like John the Baptist at the end of time. All of us collectively are like that. Again, it speaks to us in the plural. Where did you come from? If they ask you where you come from, you say you came from the light. The place where the images and
became manifest in itself.
Yeah.
On its own
So
accord.
in other words, this is our answer, right? And then when they say, what is the evidence of it in you? It is movement and it is rest. Well, what does it say at the very beginning of the Gospel of Thomas? Whoever comes to, hang on a second.
Find the understanding of these words.
Well, it says it's the second thing. Whoever seeks shouldn't stop seeking until they find. That means it's there. So same thing. So when you find it, you'll be disturbed, right? And when they're disturbed, and they'll be amazed and they will reign over the all. And the Greek version actually says, and when they rule, they will rest, right? So when it later on says that it is movement and it is rest, it means that you struggle with this canonical, non-canonical paradigm, the two, the division, the boundary, the basket, the container, the cup. All of those things are symbolized. the scriptures which are above the firmament, the waters, and those which are below, or the fact that the waters of the Red Sea were parted to the left and the right. The parting of the waters, right, is a temporary thing, right? And at some point, those waters come together, right? And they destroy our enemies, right? So those are all visuals of what happens with the word. The canonical scriptures are in a way separated from the non-canonical for a certain point until the unity between those two sets is discovered and the two become one. But on the day that you become two, what will you do? Because you're saying these books are in, those books are out, and you've lost your footing entirely at that point. So again, the axe is laid at the roots of the trees, because the trees, the teachings, along with the teachers of those teachings, are about to be uprooted, right? And so, we sit in the same place as John the Baptist. When he was a voice crying out in the wilderness, again, what it meant was when he knew that the Messiah was coming because he could read the tea leaves. It was given to him in the spirit from before he was born. He had that spirit that was imparted to him because that was his time, that was his place, that was his
he
function.
leapt in his mother's womb, right?
Absolutely.
Before he was born.
But you see, but it's because again, John the Baptist was a figure. One person encapsulated what was to represent the elect who would come at the end of time. And instead of paving the way, if you will, for the physical Son of Man, right, we usher in the Son of the Living One. That is to say, in fact, when you look at the term living, right, the hidden sayings that the living Jesus wrote, in which Didymus Judas wrote down, and he says, whoever discovers the meaning of these sayings won't taste of death. So here you have living and death, the living and the dead, right here in the prologue in sayings 1 and 2. So it's a riddle. How do you work this out, right? Well, again, anything that's hidden means that when it's not hidden, when it's open, in other words, it's something else, or it's something recognizable, it's something discernible. So I'm trying to put something in your hand and saying this is discernible. You can see this, right? And so the idea is that you won't taste of death because you know the meaning, and so therefore you come alive, you become living. So, and it speaks of in the Wisdom of Solomon that like sparks, that we will be as sparks individually, because we're all spirits. We all came from there. You know what I'm saying? We're all brothers in the heavenly thing. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's greater. What I'm saying, we're equal. You know what I'm saying? And so that's great. So we all know our place, right? But we all go throughout the world like sparks through the stubble, and that's these are the kinds of foreshadowings that we can look to and understand what is our job and what is our function in all of this, because it does give us jobs to do. It does tell us to shout it from the rooftops. It does tell us to renounce the world. It gives us these commandments.
Well, you
right?
remember Yahushua said to the man who was working on the Sabbath, if he had known what he was doing, then he would have been way more bemored. And the reason was because... Go ahead. You explain it, please.
No, you say it.
See, my theory might be a little different than yours, but what I see is that the 1,000-year reign, there's work to be done there too. And if you're already sharing the kingdom, you're actually doing that work now, right? That's why they were going around saying the kingdom is upon you, because it's
a function of knowledge. If you know what you're doing,
and righteousness, right? It's not just
he's doing the works. He's obviously doing the works, so he's in obedience. Mm-hmm. But he's doing it out of knowledge and not out of ignorance, because ignorance is like, when it speaks of this in the Gospel of Truth, it talks about it's like a fog, like it's thick, like it's confusion, and all the people in the middle, if you will, are walking around in dreams because, for example, the canon doesn't exist. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. I mean, it's there, but it's there because we say it's there. And it has its place in history for close to 2,000 years. A thing like a canon exists, right? But again, that's put in the bushel over the light that's trying to contain.
Yeah,
the team.
it becomes a how long is the cane that you're carrying compared to the cane that I'm carrying, right? That isn't the reason that we got the scriptures was so that it could just pour forth like a spring, an open fountain. It would just give in abundance. Actually, I would test. So Enoch was given the speed pen, or what we think might have been like, compressed files. 300
a tablet with Siri attached to it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We can explain, Robert. We've explained some of the second book of Enoch with an actual modern day representation of how the sun would rise, and it has the 6 gates throughout everything. Actually,
and it talks about the tablets aren't like any of the tablets.
So
I get that. Yeah,
Enoch got 366 books, right? That's what he brought, and he said
65.
65. That's right. I think it was 366, but don't quote me on it. But so again, and he wrote down the judgment of every man, of every deed that was ever done. So what I think is that we could test the spirit. We could, like, how people have turned this into a tithing thing. The more you seek, the more you're given. And for me, it's been that way since day one. And that's actually how Robert's here tonight. I found Robert's channel through, it started off, I was an Ancient Aliens fan. And I found Zen Garcia because he was doing some fallen angel Nephilim thing, and I found him, and then I found Robert and Trey Smith from those characters. And with Robert, it was like I was reading my 66 book canon. I was right into it. I had to put Enoch back because when I heard Robert reading Enoch, I was just like, wow. I didn't for a second have any doubt that it wasn't inspired, right? It said right there, this is the righteous scribe, right? So I didn't have any doubts. But then when you start getting into the Robert's page and you're learning the reason that we are here, the group of elect, what we're supposed to do, and then you start, there's so many keys to the kingdom. When you start to understand the parables, the Peter principle is something that I recommend, and we've shared it here live. Starting to understand how, like, the 3 dispensations are what we've been, the Spirit has expressed to us, that there's 3 dispensations, and then these 3s are, they're seen everywhere. You've got modern day people try to turn a Kabbalah type Trinity thing, but we think it's 3 different characters. Just like in the Ark, there's 3 items. So this parabolic language, and what the beautiful thing that you did, Robert, you stood in the face of all the Kabbalah, all of the Talmudic, Zoharian, all this stuff, and you just said, listen, a picture is a picture. Water is water. You laid it down in such a basic way. A crayon is a crayon. And you said it doesn't matter which language you want to transliterate this, the message that's contained within the image, within the thought that we've been given here, it stays the same. And so what people need to understand is these parabolic keys. Yahushua, like almost every word he said was parabolic because he was the living parable of the word. And as he was crucified or torture staked and put to death, so too were the books, right? And what Robert was obviously inspired to do was to categorize them, document them, put them into order. Robert, there's a few books that I wouldn't mind you reading if you ever felt like getting back into the ring. I don't have A Cave of Treasures from you, which is a really interesting book because it brings back the real reason why Cain's offering was rejected. When we read the regular 66 books, we think it was because he brought vegetables. Like, all the vegetables that the Father hath made is good. That right. Wasn't why he was rejected. He actually wanted to marry his own sister, his own twin sister, instead of Abel's twin sister. And that's the way that the code was set up to go together. And he actually stole his twin sister. And if you don't read the book of the Cave of Treasures, have you read it, Robert? You don't understand these meanings. Yeah. When I go into debates with people... I can stand at such a level, Robert. I can take it to any book ever written, everything that's ever been published. There's only, I think, one book. It's a Gospel of Judas, and it talks about Yahushua marrying Mary and not dying and not being raised from the dead, all that stuff. And that's the only book so far that I think I've ever not agreed with. Only one.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I would have Judas in. There are parts of it that seem to track, and there's parts of it that I don't quite understand. But again, I just put those in the I don't yet fully understand category. But I mean, as far as like what you're saying, first of all, I got to give a shout out to Rick Simpson, who on YouTube is Jesus Love 723, because he's the one who runs the website. And he does it on his own dime. So he doesn't ask for anything. He does it on his own. And again, that's one of those things where I feel like all of us at the end of time, anyone who hears this voice, so to speak, has some obligation to promulgate the teaching in some way, form, again, or fashion. I mean, even if it's through the sharing of videos or whatever. I know that there is a version of the Cave of Treasures out there on YouTube. Which
Not with you. We've read it, but you haven't. Is what
Yeah.
I'm saying. I'd like to hear you
well,
read
I
it
might
personally.
I might do it.
I
just feel like
that's a request from me. And if the guy who runs the website has an IP tracker, because if I was to screen share, you guys will see there's probably 12 links open from Robert's website. Again, so when you go to the website that I just put the link in, there's free MP3s. And when you click onto that, you get right in, boom, Robert hits you off with the concept of the canon is misleading. So you really confront people right off the bat. You boom. Next link that you get is the straight dope on allegories, and this is where we start to understand the things like the leaven and how the light of the heavenly understanding was couched in the earthly. You walk people through it. Boom. Then we get to the hidden keys to the kingdom. This is for me, when I was blown away, and ladies and gentlemen, it took me 10 years. I've been studying this stuff for 10 years because for me, it was more fascinating to try to understand, and I wanted this stuff. Robert was like, whoa, 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 speaking another language to me when I first found the content. Now I understand the Peter principles. Peter was a parable for the church, and how the church was going to deny that the light of the heavenly understanding was couched in the earthly 3 times, 3 dispensations. Right? And at the end, when the elect come, they're the ones that are going to be able to speak this from the rooftops. They're going to be filled with light. And Robert, what I've been talking about lately is shining, because I did some serious contemplation on what a parable for shining could be, because it says we'll shine as bright as the stars in the sky. And I think if we look at the sun itself, I've been saying to people, when I say shining, I liken it unto the sun, because the sun rises and he shines on everyone. He's the bringer of life, yet we can't feed the sun. He doesn't ask us for anything. So 2, we shall go out in the world and shine on people in the same way. So we don't literally have to become light beings blasting out light. We just have to go around speaking truth, sharing the mysteries to the kingdom. But see, the thing is when we go and speak this to people, when we were in a debate with someone who was trying to argue that we needed to follow, he was John the 10 Commandments Baptist, is where this guy took it. You need to set up ear roofs so that you can carry on the Sabbath. All these different things that these guys were bringing, they were definitely dragging behind them the law. And like you had explained so well, the parable of understanding the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it was the law. And when you eat of it, you die. Surely no one was saved under the law, right? But through what you've shared, through understanding the parabolic mysteries and the keys to the kingdom, especially the book of Thomas, you then eat and become alive again. You become a flowing spring, like you've been drunk upon the living waters of life. And so when you hear people who can speak these things, it starts to become poetic through everything that they do. The Spirit just moves through us. We don't have any control over it. It's like the wind. We don't know where it comes or where it goes. Robert was doing this stuff. You called the year 2000. You thought we were close with your timeline to the 7th day, going into the period of rest, right? Or understanding day. We're through night.
Well, it wasn't lost on me that the timing was there. I mean, why would I be in 1990 whatever, like having this stuff, like, the scales just falling from your eyes and seeing stuff, and it's like, this is for the world. But even at that time, it was like, well, how does this even get conveyed? Because this was when the internet age was young, I think, and hardly anybody had it, myself included. What I'm saying? So it wasn't, I was thinking of maybe it would be word of mouth or, but I had this notion that it would just take off, that like it would just happen, that if you spoke it, right? But I think at the time I was young and naive, and I didn't have any concept that people could like hear the truth and not care, or something like that.
I'm right there with you on that, Robert. That's I know what you're talking about. I went through the same naivete completely.
Yeah, I thought everybody was looking for truth, but again, that was a different time. That was a different age,
Then we had the
Sister-
Janet Jackson thing with Justin Timberlake. YouTube was born. So if you guys want to mentally date when YouTube came on board, because obviously, Robert, you were one of the first people on YouTube, way before Google owned it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I wasn't that far. I think I came in 2007, 2006. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's way before
I
Google
just
bought it.
That's
what I
early.
had what I had was some. Well, see, that was the thing back in the year 2000. If you go back to some of my old videos, and hardly anybody does because they've only got a few thousand views on them. Some of them don't even have that.
You don't always
people
trust
look
the
at-
analytics, Robert. You
People
can't.
don't delve into my old stuff too much, but that's where some of the really cool stuff was, because that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was doing videos, and all it was I put up a video camera that I had at the end of a table, and I just wanted to see if I sounded crazy or not. You know what I'm saying? It really boiled down to it.
Come on, really?
Um,
You had the bookcase behind
kinda,
you in some
yeah.
of the videos. You did
Well,
a video.
no, because you got to make that case before people. What if
Yeah.
what if I had a meeting with a pastor? What if I had what if I
It
made
was
a breakthrough
professional.
somehow?
Everything that
You know
you
what I'm
did
saying?
was you were on point, professional, well spoken. You had prepared. You had notes. Your videos were great. You even taught people a bunch of different things. I can remember, and some of the videos that you did were responses to comments. You would do that quite a bit back in the day, years and years ago. But really, it was the Book of Enoch is obviously what your channel blew up with, right?
Yeah, that was the thing. Well, again, not to sound like what I mean, just from my own experience, when I was doing this again, this all started to me in the early 90s. This was really before the internet was kind of a thing. And again, it was really only for my own purposes that I did this. I wanted to read a lot of these books onto tape once I came to this discovery, because I wanted to be able to listen to these tapes while I did other things, drove around or did the yard work or something. I wanted to have the ability to absorb all of this stuff while I was doing it. And so
that decision right there, Robert, is one of the most golden decisions you've ever had in your life. That is,
Yeah, because
Thank you.
it illumined me, because for years and years, I mean, it was just me and my tapes, and I would just listen and listen and listen, and the pieces would fall together. And see, the
That's
thing
what I
about it
do.
is, I'm not like it's just somehow it all came to me in as like a giant mixing pot. You know what I'm saying? It just seemed like the person over here was saying the same thing as the person over here was saying the same thing as the person over there. And I thought, these aren't really disparate things. These are all kind of the same thing. You know what I'm saying? And it just sort of seemed to me like that was the inevitable consequence of everybody speaking the same language, was that this was all one big inspired thing. And so that sort of was what made me feel like, well, what about these gospels? Can I put them together? Does that work? You know what I'm saying? And so then I started with the
it
super
works.
gospel. But see, all that stuff was for my own sake. But I wanted to get back to your point, Ronnie, because you talked about light.
Yeah.
And the Gospel of Thomas talks about light too. And I think it says it's a question and it's an answer. Okay, the disciples asked the question. It says, show us the place where you are, because we need to look for it, right? And Jesus answers them, first of all, it says, anyone with ears to hear should hear, right? So he's already making the distinction between people who see two levels and people who don't, right? He's basically laying down that you have to have the two levels of understanding. You have to have the right eyes to see and the right ears, in other words, to hear. But what it then says is, it says, light exists within a person of light. Now, what was the question that was asked? Show us the place where you are, right? Because we need to look for it. So the answer to the question of where you are, he answers light. Light exists within a person of light. So we need to look for it where? Within the person, within yourself. You see what I'm saying? That jives with the whole idea that he will become us, because the light within us is him, right? And so the question again is, where are you, right? He says light exists within a person of light. Where do we go to look for you? Well, the answer is within yourself. Why? Because you will be speaking with his words, or he will be speaking with your mouth. Which is it? You will be thinking with his thoughts, or he will be putting his thoughts into your heart. Which is it? You know what I'm saying? And it's an intimate thing, that I think that I know, and I think that um, Jared knows, and I think that you guys know, because you're versant in the language, and you walk in that light, the light of it. But he's very specifically saying here that he is the light, and the place to find him is within. And then once you have him within you, right, you're able then to light up the whole world. But until that happens, unless that becomes, unless you allow for that inspiration within yourself, that place for him in your heart and in your mouth and whatnot, what I'm saying? But you can light up the world with that, because you're speaking, again, his words. Or is it his? Again, it's,
Yeah. So
the two have become one.
you have to
in a
become
sense.
the conduit by allowing the valve to be turned on and allowing it to flow through you.
Well, it's the bridal chamber.
It's
Right.
it's so interesting that you bring these topics up, because I've been contemplating lately, who comforts the comforter was one of my questions. I don't know if you want to try to answer that one, Robert.
I would say, is the sea troubled by the storms that rage upon it.
That's a
It's
great
much
answer.
larger and more, it's much bigger than the surface,
There's that question, and then again, it's the same thing. Is the kingdom? They asked him, "Show us the kingdom. Where's the kingdom?" And he said, "The kingdom is within you and without you." And it's so too is the same with Yahushua and Yahweh. They are within us and without us, because the kingdom is also within you, Robert. It's also within you, Jason. It's also
But how many times have you thought about, like, how many times have you thought about something and there it was? You know what I'm
Lots.
saying? Okay, so did you not feel at that time that there was some relationship between your inner world and the outer world as it manifested to you?
I am a anti-coincidence theorist. Like, somebody
Okay.
wants to put coincidence theory up against me, I'm coming hard back against them, because what I
Well,
actually see is that there's probably some sort of underlying reason why this thing that I could be passed off as a coincidence took place. And I'm always looking for the deeper hidden meaning every single time it takes place.
here was the thing. This is to me, okay, hear me out. When someone asks me what I believe in, my one and really only answer is that I believe in truth. And there's a lot of things that are concomitant with that. And probably greater than truth is love, but this is the way the Bible speaks, because love is the overarching reason why the truth came into existence, because everything was done out of this desire to bring us alive again at some point. And so we walk through this valley, this shadow, this death of the age, wearing the flesh and walking in the flesh and being given the teachings of the flesh to things that are spiritual. And we know that they're spiritual because we can bring out their spiritual nature. We can bring that light out of the word. That is the logos. That is the teaching. And you see, like it says in the Gospel of Philip, that in this world you are not what you see. You can see the sun without being the sun. You can see, whatever, the mountain without being the mountain. But in the spirit, it's different. It's like you become what you see. So it's kind of like, how like you can't unsee something, like you may be looking at an illusion or something, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I see it. And then you can't unsee it, right? Because you have, in a sense, become one with that realization, that insight, that seeing. And so you now are changed a little bit, such that what was not visible to you before is visible to you now, and now your awareness of it is different. And so if you're able to to tease out the meanings of these words, because again, it's like I've said a million times before, it's just saying the same things kind of over and over and over again. This is part of the reason why it's like how many ways do we got to look at this? But I guess the thing is, people need that, or people want that. They want to kind of be taken by the hand or whatever, but you're capable of finding these things yourself. You know, I've talked to a number of people who have intuited the same kinds of things that I intuited, you know, and I kind of want to leave room for that for people, because this should be their own personal search. This should be their own personal venture. This should be like, they should be looking for that within themselves, right? All of us should be, right? All of us are his children. Therefore, we all need to take his hand. You know what I'm saying? As far as that's concerned, that's why I very rarely ever perfect anything, because I always want to leave room for other people to think they can do better, you know, and I have seen a lot of people do better.
That is an intelligent position to play. And I commend you for it, because you just acknowledge that is the way you play things. So leaving the room for somebody to pick up the Easter egg actually encourages the people that would come along and find the Easter egg and become inspired by it. So that is a super intelligent play, Robert, and I commend you for it. That is strategically beyond so many people. I can't even begin to say how many that's ahead of.
Well, I mean, the one thing I can tell you is that I'm extraordinarily average. And I figure if an extraordinarily average person can stumble upon this, then the world is full of people who can discern it.
You're stealing my lines, man. If I can do it, ladies and gentlemen on the other side of the screen, I'm telling you guys, you can do it. And not
well, it's meant for all of us.
Yes.
Look, anybody who hears this voice is a secret language. When John the Baptist was speaking this language, he said, "I am a voice crying out in a wilderness." A wilderness is a place of waiting. A wilderness is a place where the time passes, you know, that you're lost and you're wandering around. It's symbolic of this current age of where we are, quote unquote, lost. And the idea that he is a voice crying out in the wilderness, you know, to make straight the ways of the Son of God, right? He's talking about, look, make it straightforward. Like if you, this is very straightforward. None of this is convoluted. This is the thing that people got to see. Again, going back to Jude, something you know, he cites the source. That's pretty straightforward. Enoch. He cites the antiquity, the seventh from Adam. Pretty straightforward. He announces the prophetic nature of it, prophesied, right? And the relevancy of these men, or some translations even say to these men. And if it's to these men, it means that these men should be listening to Enoch, which is very provocative, right? But then it gives the quote so that you know to match the source with that title. This book that I have that I can match up is this title, the book. So he encapsulates all that. So what he's really telling you is, look, this is the book you should be reading. It's ancient, it's prophetic, right? And it bears on this age. So it's relevant. So he might as well have just said that. Read this book. It's ancient, it's prophetic, it's relevant, right? And it's about the judgment, right? And if he's read all the way to Enoch 1:9, it occurs to me that he probably has read Enoch 1:1, the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, that's us, who will be, well, I wouldn't kind of say righteous, but I'm just talking about collectively, right? That is to the elect and righteous who be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and the godless are to be removed, right? And he took up his parable, so there's a parabolic element here, and said, Enoch, whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the angels showed me, and from them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw. Again, it's an understanding that comes from a seeing, right? That's what parables work, right? And he said, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. Concerning the elect, I said, and took up my parable concerning them. So clearly this book is for us, right? So why does Jude give us this narrow little way, this narrow little entrance?
Clearly. I just want to shout that out, Robert. Clearly this book is for us, right? I mean, you nailed it, but let's get everybody's attention. Clearly this book is for us.
Well, again, you just label it. He cites the source. he cites its antiquity, he cites its prophetic nature, he cites its relevance, and then he cites a lengthy passage so you can.
And then he tells
identify
us
it.
to fight for it.
And he
to
tells
fight
us
for
to
it.
fight for the faith which was once for all delivered unto the saints. That is a command. So here this book has been relegated to probably the very least. I don't want to say that this is, I think that sometimes when God lets us have our way, sometimes it looks as though the devil's winning, but he's not, because God's just giving ground, and it's strategic, because that book is basically relegated to the least important position in the entire New Testament, I think, because it's like the next to the last book. You're going to put it after 2nd John, you're going to put it after 3rd John, you're going to put it before the book of Revelation. So that's basically biblical flyover country. You know what I'm saying? As far as most people are concerned. And further, there's such an intimate relationship between that book and 2nd Peter that if you were going to put it anywhere, you'd want to put it after 2nd Peter, because that's where it makes the most sense. You could put those two books together and literally conflate the two books, you know what I'm saying, and read it in the context of 2nd Peter and understand that 2nd Peter exists to defend what Jude is saying.
But I would just
and to enhance it.
That's a
And he
huge
speaks
point.
about
That's a
that little
huge point,
entrance
Robert.
too that'll be given to us
So
if we do so.
I want to interject. So just what you had said in the sentence before is that the Father takes the enemy's plans and then uses it against them. So they specifically separated the two books as far as they could and as most, insignificantly as they could make it. And yet all
Right.
it did was it gave you the evidence to say, look, the scripture said this was going to happen. Here they did it. Verifying again, fulfilled, right? Prophecy.
Well, again, when Enoch says that it is not for this generation, that means that it has to be kept out. So there's a mechanism for keeping it out, and that is to say, you put it in the hands of men, men will tamper with it and keep it out. But you place within it that affirmation. Again, I cite the source, I cite its antiquity, I cite its prophetic nature, I cite its relevance, and I give you a quote to identify it. Right?
And then
that puts the book back into your hands.
and she had to put the meal in it 3 times. Right?
Yes, 3 times. Three measures.
Three measures.
The first revelation was given again to the Jews. That was like the Old Testament, and that, the second to the Christians, that's the second one. And there's a third one, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the third measure of meal. And it was hidden, right?
That was like the name that was hidden before man. It's all these things.
Leaven is a teaching.
Yes,
right.
it's
So
the
it's
understanding.
mixed in and it's hidden with this. But this is God's leaven. This is his teaching. But again, it isn't just that it's this book or whatever. It's the whole thing hangs together. And that, again, the gospel of truth, I keep saying the same things, but the gospel of truth talks about the unitary knowledge, right? Gospel of Thomas, the same thing. When you make the two into one, what is that? It touches on a lot of things. Don't get me wrong. Your inner with your outer. In other words, the world around you is the same, is run, if you will, by the same God as the world within you. You know what I'm saying? He's got a hand on both things. You know what I'm saying? They're intimately connected. There isn't causality as we understand it. I don't cause A, which causes B, which causes C.
because you'd
There's
have to go
something
all the way
outside of me.
Yeah. You'd have to go back to Adam if you wanted to use causality as an argument, right?
It's a little bit more like, although I don't know, it's a little bit more like as if the ground were to come into existence where you stepped. Something about the intentionality of God wanting you to have free will. If it's his will that you have free will, then there's no contradiction. You see, if it means that it's the same thing. He wants you to do what you think is right, and he's made room for you. He talks about this in the gospel of truth. It's like you're something that's going to come into existence, right? That it doesn't mean that you're not significant because you haven't yet come into existence, but when he comes and he calls you, he's going to give you a name That is to say, we are given collectively the name of the elect. That's the new stone, if you will, which is the New Testament, the white stone, with a name that's given that's only discernible by those who accept it, right? So in other words, this is a function of our acceptance, and it is a white stone. That is to say, white has to do with the purity of it, and the stone has to do with the fact that it is a testament or a dispensation, you know what I'm saying, given to us. Yeah,
It's
that
the
we
best one.
recognize it.
It's about the children becoming light beings of righteousness and tilling the earth in righteousness and happiness for 1,000 years. It's the best one. Like, I love the other dispensations, the Father, and then, you know, John the Baptist, Yahushua said he was the greatest man that ever lived, was the arrow pointing us forward into the second dispensation, which is that of the Son. And then he worked, and now we get to, as a collective group, become the children of righteousness. That Enoch wrote of, we go all the way back to the seventh from Adam, and we get this book that you've been expounding upon tonight, and we find out that there's these righteous people. Listen, I'm a sinner, Jason's a sinner, I'm sure Robert sinned. It says in the book, literally, that these people will be changed. They will want righteousness, and they will be given it. And they will become fountains of righteousness, feeding everyone. And that's where we are. And there couldn't be anything greater. The third dispensation, that's the one that I'm eagerly waiting. Now, Jason, you've theorized that we've got to go through. So it was the Levites that went through the land and wiped out all the people that didn't conform to what Yahweh had wanted, correct? In the desert. So the 7 years of tribulation should be like a basic war zone, and then we get to the righteousness. Or, you know, sometimes I theorize, like, can we just be translated and get out of here? I know that there's a lot of Christians pushing rapture sway and rapture talk. I would like just to hear, Robert, your opinion of what you think the 7 years of tribulation is going to be.
Okay. The way I see it, I don't know that I conform to the same kind of timeline or whatever that most other people do. I feel like that this is kind of this is going to be something that just kind of unfolds, and it's hard for me to, I think, call what's going to happen in the future. You know, I don't know that that's my forte or my thing or my calling, to be honest with you. I think what's going to happen is that because this is what it's telling us is going to happen. People are going to be transformed. Like you talk about the book of Enoch in chapters 104 to 105. What does it say? It says that to reveal it to them with our knowledge, right? For you are a guide upon the earth, right? And then it talks about how after that we are going to live and walk in blessedness, right? The tribulation, as you read it in the Shepherd of Hermas, where it talks about Segri, where it talks about how at some point it just lays its head down and you walk right past it, right? This could have a better ending than all of that. It says that it will literally be nothing to you, you know, if you stand up to it, right? And if you believe, right? So I think a lot of what happens really boils down to what path we take as Christians. Are we going to take the straight path, or are we going to, you know, reject what's given to us?
Are we going to build upon sand, or are we going to have our basis of knowledge founded upon the rock, which is including all of the different inspired books? So that
the rock is, yeah. Well, it has to do with digging down. You know, the sand is something that, because it only has other sand grains or whatever supporting it, right? It's not a solid foundation, right? And so the idea is you have to dig deep. And the idea is by digging deep into the earth, you reach the bedrock. Well, again, the earth, like it says, the field is the world, right? For example, the field, the earth, the world, you think dirt, you think planting, you think, you know, what is more earthly than the earth itself, so to speak? You know, you can line up the flesh, the poverty, the darkness, the whatever with earthly, with, you know, lower, with the, you know, they all track on kind of the same thing, because it's really kind of about the heavenly versus the earthly. And all earthly understandings are necessarily basically wrong. The words are right, but we don't understand the words. And so everything that is derived from those gets filtered through our own understanding, and it gets polluted because it's what comes out of our mouth that pollutes us. And what comes out of our mouth is our own ideas and our own theologies or whatever. And so we can put all that word into our mouths, and there's nothing wrong with it, including this, the Gospel of Thomas or Enoch or whatever else we're reading. It's what comes out of our mouth that is to say what we say about it. Do we say that the Gospel of Thomas is inspired? Or do we say it's spurious? Do we say that Enoch is inspired? Or do we say that it's fiction? You know what I'm saying? It's just, how do we, and it's the things that we've said that has the problem.
Can I pause you right now, Robert? Because you just hit on a couple of terms, the earthly and the heavenly. So one of the things that I feel that a whole bunch of people may have misinterpretations of the scriptures on is, what is the hope for those that are going to be saved. And so you're talking about the earthly and the heavenly. And so one of the things in the scriptures is like, are we going to heaven? Is our eternal hope in heaven, or is our hope here on earth? What have you seen in the scriptures?
Yes. When you read the book of Revelation, right, what do you have? You have the entrances, which are the first things, right? You enter in through something. So that's first, right? And then those are the patriarchs, right? And again, this is another one of those good things comes in threes kinds of things, right? And then you have the foundations of the second revelation. Those are the apostles, right? And the number 144, that's associated with the walls, the measurement, the number of the man, and also of the angel. That is to say that, because again, in the same way that Jacob wrestled with the angel and became Israel, right? Because he is the third. There's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Abraham represents the Jews. Isaac, the sacrifice, represents the Christians. This type. And Jacob, again, like it says in Second Ezra, how long until the end of the age? Well, it's all the way to, his foot or whatever. Again, basically symbolizing that he represents that transition from that third state into the true Israel, right? So the the idea is that we are going to be transformed at the end into something that transcends all human thought and all human experience and all that we can think of as being human. And at that point, we will be the true Israel. And the Gospel of Thomas speaks of this as rest, right? The idea is that once you reign, you will rest. The idea is that by knowing the truth will set you free. And also by knowing the truth, you are able to pull down the false. You're able to pull down the strongholds of this world. I think what we're talking about here is something that's going to be really, really triumphant, and something that's going to be really, really it's meant to. It's meant to humiliate the powers that be. Babylon falls and everybody gloats and rejoices over it. It's going to I don't like to tie things too much to current events, but I can see that current events are building up to something that's very final, and it's like a giant zit that's about to pop or something, that we're moving towards this happening where Babylon could fall. We're teetering on that. I think people are afraid right now that the powers that be are going to tighten their grip on us, and that we are going to enter into some dark age. And this is a great time, if you will, to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, so to speak, by undermining the temporal. See, this whole thing, it undermines the temporal. You see the eternal hand in this. You see the eternal power that's in this when you recognize the nature of the spiritual terms. When you recognize the two levels of meaning, when you recognize that there's no canonical and non-canonical. Okay, it all has to do with the understanding of the speech. It's drawn along entirely different lines. And so all that we've taken down as tradition is based upon a falsehood that we now see through. It's based upon a falsehood that we now recognize. So the very recognition of this falsehood is like the scales falling off of our eyes. Well, if enough scales fall off of enough eyes, if our a collective spiritual consciousness, awareness, whatever you want to call it, the unity of thought, the unity of spirit, the unity of purpose. If we reach a certain critical mass and a certain threshold, maybe this tribulation will be as nothing. You know, maybe we will look narrowly upon the evil people who run this world and the devil and say, is this the person who had, you know, and will we look upon them as something weak and inferior and pathetic and dead, and recognize and see through it, and how much greater that surpassing glory that we've come to understand is than this temporal lie that we've been given. Then
Amen.
I think that we reach those spiritual heights
Yes.
because of that unity.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. It's like finally when wisdom has a place to dwell, when all of a sudden we will begin to start to break down the strongholds of the wicked, and they will be removed from this place. And, you know, I've been contemplating it. So the poetic language, the inspiration that's put into man, the way that it comes out, when we see enough people that are able to not only speak this, but just simply flow it right out of them, it's going to be apparent. You're not going to say, oh, the sky looks dark, it's going to rain today. You will see someone and you'll be like, that person is different. You will feel it. You will know. And then that one person, like Robert had said, you don't put a lamp under a basket. No, you take it out. The spirit is going to be thrust out into the open for everyone to see. We are to shine as bright as the stars in the sky. Jason has a, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, I mean, let's just run a few examples in front of people. Let's do a little bit of decoding, I think, so people, I know that mostly your audience probably is familiar with this stuff, but just for the sake of doing it, you know, the idea, like, for example, in saying 28, when it talks about drunkenness, right? Again, one of the easy keys for anything is to understand that because there's an earthly level and there's a spiritual level, right? One of the easy things that you can do to snap out of this stupor and to gain those extra eyes and to gain those extra ears, so to speak, is to just parenthetically put the spiritual in front of something. Like when it says he healed the eyes, well, on the spiritual level, that's spiritual eyes. If he heals ears in the physical, what are spiritual ears, right? Just the idea that you know that the physical is carrying within it, latent within it, that higher level meaning, and that you're able to say, yeah, now I've added an ear to the one that I already had, or I've added an eye to the one I already have. Now I see the two, and I recognize that the one contains the other. A couple of things. Well, I'll start with this one because it kind of leads into the next one. It says, I stood in the midst of the world and appeared to them in the flesh. That is to say, in the midst of the world. Okay, so like I explained in the series on Revelation, midst has to do with centrality. You know, when you see something in the midst of heaven or in the midst of this or in the midst of that, it has to do with the very centrality of something, right? And he's saying he is the central reason for all of existence. I stood in the midst of the world, all right? I was central, right? And I appeared to them in the flesh, right? So already you have him as the absolute reason of all reasons why there is history, right? And his appearance to them was that of a fleshly appearance. And it found all of them drunk, right? Because again, it's about duality. What is drunkenness compared to sobriety? Spiritual drunkenness is the idea that you're following what your leaders are telling you, right?
All right, so,
Spiritual
Robert,
sobriety has the idea that that the light is within you, and that you're following that from within.
I just got to mention that duality is a trigger word for me. It so duality is something that I take issue with. I feel like it's based off of the opposites, that there's somehow an opposite of a thing. And we've brought up in other hangouts how, you know, like what's the opposite of a computer, or what's the opposite of an apple, or a whole bunch of other things. I think there is a psyop at play in duality. So I just want to just do a quick interjection there, because on this channel, when it comes to the word duality, I'm always like one of the first people to come hard against it.
Well, I think there's that sense that everything is a thing in and of itself. That's certainly true. But I think the way that this is used, like I think in terms of corollaries, like if this is true, then you can extrapolate that the other is true, or that the other is false based on extrapolation, or based on whether they're correlates or not.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
intuition
A
and all that kind of
but
stuff. Yeah.
but in order to understand that what is fleshly is being contrasted with what is spiritual, and the two are laid up against one another. And when you read something like the Didache, for example, when it talks about the way of light and the way of darkness, it's like they're connected. If you follow the way of darkness, you have this whole set of I guess circumstances or whatever that follow, a certain set of consequences that
Yeah,
follow
absolutely.
from
And
that.
so if
And
yeah, they're
and so those two are placed, they're
interconnected for sure.
juxtaposed.
Yeah.
They're juxtaposed. And when you see a word like, for example, in this case, since we're right at this thing, if you see something, like drunkenness, well, the corollary to that is, or the well, I don't know how you think of it in a non-dualistic way. The idea is that the drunkenness is against sobriety, the darkness is against light.
And
There is a
anti-sobriety, right?
well, but again, from the standpoint of what is the function of evil, right, and why does it exist in our world, and anyone can intuit that, well, you have to have some kind of adversity or else you won't have any virtue. Like, in other words, you couldn't save somebody from a fire if there wasn't a fire to begin with. You know what I'm saying? And if there was never a fire, how would you know if you were a hero?
This is key argument, right?
Well, but what I'm saying is that in order for good to be good, like, don't get me wrong. I mean, but the idea is that, like, for example, just imagine, if you will, a state where we had been created and there was no fall, there was no sin. Like, if you had no lusts or no desires or no faults or no angers, that you existed eternally in an exalted state without ever having been tried, without ever having experienced hardship, without ever having experienced confusion or any such thing, right?
No lesson learned.
Well, but also there's no value added. Jesus or Yeshua talks about this. He says, listen, when you love your friends, right? How does that make you different from the evil person? Do they not do that? Or when you loan in full expectation of repayment, how does that make you different? The idea is that you got to be different, right? So you have to face some kind of adversity. You have to be able to let some things go, if you will, if that should happen to you, etc. You have to be willing to test yourself and to try yourself and to push yourself, and in all of those things, they're forged in adversity. So you could say that adversity and virtue are kind of the same thing, because it is through adversity that you became strong, or it was through
you get to demonstrate your virtue, right?
Right, but like I said, if the truth is made greater by overcoming the lie, right? And this is what I feel like the plan basically is to demonstrate the weakness of the lie against the strength of the truth, so that, I hate to say it, that you will know the truth, that the very thing that it said at the very beginning, that if you have the knowledge of good and you have the knowledge of evil, that you will be like him, right? Which is again, but that's kind of the idea, that's kind of the payoff, that he had to go through that death or whatever in order to get that knowledge that he sought. When he was in Hades or whatever, and when he came back up, Adam, I mean, the idea was that this whole age, that everything had descended from him, right? And that he saw all of these descendants or whatever that had come from him. that in a sense it was his fall that allowed everyone to be born and to be let out of this prison, if you will, into freedom. But what is this freedom without the fetters? You have to go through the fetters first. What is knowledge without the ignorance? You have to go through the ignorance first. What is virtue without the sin? What is the resurrection without the fall? What is the Son of Man, if you will, as it speaks of in Philip, as opposed to the Son of Man. The Son of Man was the result, was the coming, if you will, of the physical, the man in the flesh, the born of Mary, right? And it says, well, when you see the one who was not born of woman, right, fall down on your faces and worship, for that one is your God. Let me see if I can find that actually.
Just want to let you know that there's a fair amount of appreciation tonight for what you're dropping on us, Robert.
Well, I appreciate that. I had it here. Hang on a second. Okay, so it says, when you see the one who wasn't born of woman and fall down on your face and worship that person, that's your father. Well, again, born of woman has to do with the flesh. Because again, we can't see through the lens of the 20th and the 21st centuries or whatever. We have to see through the lens of what it meant. The idea is that you're bringing flesh into the world, and so everything it has to do with the flesh and being brought into this world, rightly or wrongly, fortunately or unfortunately, that's all a function of the reproductive nature, if you will, of being born. You know what I'm saying? It's just, that's a fact of life, is that you're born. But then who does it say? Well, here, hang on a second. So where's the corollary to this, or where's the answer to this question, right? Because it's also in Thomas. Yeah, it says, okay, it's actually several different places where this is explained. Let me get the obvious one. Oh, yeah. When you strip naked without being ashamed and throw your clothes on the ground and stomp on them like little children would, then you'll see the Son of the Living One, and you won't be afraid. Clothing has to do with your religion or your occupation. The clothing that you wear, like they speak of man of the cloth, for example. The idea is that when you see those stations, if you will, then that's because you've come alive and you've recognized the living nature, if you will. Also, where it says in 52, it says, his disciples said, 24 prophets have spoken in Israel, and they all spoke of you. And he says, you've ignored the living one right in front of you, and you've talked about those who are dead. So he doesn't speak of himself as being born of woman, but being alive, being the living one. And it says, look for the living one while you're still alive. And what does it mean to be alive? Well, it says, whoever comes to know the meanings of these words will not taste of death. That means they'll taste of life. They will be alive, in other words, spiritually alive, right? Because we put spiritually and parenthetically in front of alive, right? Spiritually living.
There is not a time
a
time that we've come across a teaching of yours that we've felt like you were intentionally trying to mislead people. And we come across that kind of stuff a lot. So this is a refreshing time to have you on and just go through deep dives in the scriptures and not see hidden agendas. It's a tough thing to come by in this world right now.
Well, yeah, that I'm not trying to push an agenda, man.
No, I
It's
know.
like this. You're trying to see things. I'm trying to see things. I'm trying to show things when I do things like this. I'm trying to give you eyes to see and ears to hear.
Paint the picture.
And hopefully a mind to think.
Paint
you
the
know.
picture. We're trying
Well,
to paint it.
If you're a light, you see, because if you're a light, then see, okay, the light comes on, so to speak, within your heart, within your mind. You get the fire of the Spirit once you see this, because now you recognize the internal in this. You recognize the plan in this, and so you come alive. So the idea is that you're not looking at the one born of woman, that is to say, the one of the flesh. You're looking at the other one, because again, there were going to be three revelations: one from the Father, and within that, like we see in the Ark of the Covenant, there were three stages of revelation, or like we see with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in that pattern, or like we see in other kinds of symbolism with the three. The idea is that there's a first coming of him, and where he is the suffering servant, and then there is a second coming of him where he is the triumphant one, and the sword comes out of his mouth, and he wages war with that sword. Well, what is the sword? The sword of the Spirit is the word of God. So more words are going to come, if you will, out of his mouth in the form of a spiritual sword, or the sword of his word. And that he's going to wage war against the enemies or whatever and triumph with his word. That is to say, at the end of time. And that's symbolic of how it is that we are going to be able to speak and to relate this word. In other words, we will be not looking at the fleshly son, right, or him in the flesh. Although what he did in the flesh, he did because the flesh carried with it the meaning of the Spirit. In other words, the flesh had to be railroaded because the logos had to be railroaded. That the flesh had to be found guilty because the logos would be found guilty. That the flesh would have to be abused and beaten and destroyed, and some of it come off in the same way that some of the logos is going to be lost and abused and whatever. He's reduced down to the physical because it's possible to do that. The reason why it's possible, and I've spoken of this before too, is because what he did in the flesh was more glorious than anything anybody else could have ever done in the flesh. And so therefore it stands out as being way over and way above anything that anybody else has done or could do, or is even possible with men. And yet beyond that, what he did in the flesh carried with it a further meaning, a spiritual meaning, a meaning that was to be unveiled in due time, which I believe is now, because it's being unveiled. Therefore, it's hand in glove, the time with the unveiling with the time. You know what I'm saying? It's 6 1, half dozen the other. There's an intimate relationship.
But isn't it greater? Isn't it greater of that the Spirit is born from the flesh, rather the flesh is born out of the Spirit, right?
Well, okay, whoever has found the world has found a corpse, and of them the world is not worthy, right? Because why? Because it's dead. Again, life and death. What is death? Death is not knowing. Life is knowing, right? The world doesn't know. The world doesn't give you this answer. The world doesn't give you this insight. The church doesn't know. The church doesn't give you this answer. The church doesn't give you this insight. The one thing that gives you this answer, the one thing that gives you this insight is the unitary thought of the Logos. That's the one thing that gives it to you. Everything else is all just speculation. But again, one of my favorite passages in all of this, hang on a second here.
I prefer all the scriptures that talk about his limitlessness. Robert, I'm sorry. I know you've been talking about the Gospel of Truth, and there's a few other books that you've mentioned. After I changed my YouTube channel from the Event Skeptic to the Limitless channel, I started finding all these limitless references in some of the extra canonical books. So those are my favorite scriptures. Plus, I just like the idea of forever, for eternity, like limitlessness. That's just my favorite.
Well, they're okay. All truth is eternal. All truth is eternal. And if you are of the truth, that means you're eternal too. I mean, I use this example because it's the simplest thing I can think of. We all know that 1 + 1 = 2, right? Everybody knows that. So it's because it's true It means that it's not dependent on time and space or anything else. It just exists as a truth eternally. There's nothing you can do about it. You cannot make 1 + 1 not equal 2 in a real world. Okay. You could have a subjective agreement that we want to make it 3 or whatever you want to make it, but that's all done by force and by farce and by, a lie. You know what I'm saying? That you can't. A truth is a truth is a truth, and it's just true in and of itself. You could ask the same question about the eternal, anything eternal, God, whatever. Well, who created God? Well, who created the fact that 1 + 1 = 2? Do you need a creator for that, or it just is, right? Well, okay, if 1 + 1 = 2 is an eternal truth that has no beginning and no end, but it's something you can understand, what about everything else? What about all the stuff you can't understand? Look, what if there is love and there is hate? What if there is wisdom and what if there is folly? What if those things just are? What framework would exist to let all of those things interact with one another to a point where they all come to a head and everything gets separated back? Because again, the usefulness that evil has, like I said, is in the idea that by concealing the truth, it makes the revelation of the truth that much more revelatory and that much more glorious, and it shows up the falsehood for being the true falsehood that it is. And so it makes it even more inglorious than it otherwise would be. It makes it more ignoble than it otherwise would be. For people who understand the words that I'm saying, for people who get the idea of the keys, the lie just doesn't exist anymore. The lie that there's a canon or whatever, just it doesn't exist in your thoughts anymore. That paradigm is utterly removed. And so really what's left? Yeah, they've given you words that are accurate, but they haven't given you accurate meanings of those words, and they haven't given you accurate teachings of those words. And you don't get anything from them, other than the feels or whatever, and it's not substance. But this is substance. This is the true meat, if you will, of the spirit, would be to be able to be given those eyes to see and those ears to hear, so that you can use your hands, and replace a hand that's doing the wrong works with the hand that's doing the right works. Trade the foot that's on the wrong path for the foot that's on the right path. The idea is that you're trading the lesser for the greater. You're trading in a used car for a new Ferrari. You know what I'm saying? It's you're not getting worse. This is not leaving you with a vacuum. This is giving you something that is so over and above. And it doesn't mean that what came before is trash. It was a conveyance. The book of Enoch even says this of itself. Look at it. It's not for his generation, but it is for a future generation. So in other words, there's a time for it to not be in the Bible, and there's a time for it to basically be, read scripture among Christians, among believers. Put it that way, because I'm not sure I believe in a canon per se. The idea is that if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you'll be able to understand Thomas. You'll be able to understand Philip. You'll be able to understand John. You'll be able to understand Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We
know that there was scripture that was given that was then to be withheld, right?
Yes.
Well, so it's
the same person. Well, we talked about the cup, right? The same person who made the outside of the cup is the same person who made the inside of the cup. The cup is a container. So the same person who made the outside of the container, in other words, formed the 66, right? It was for the purposes of keeping the truth from you don't want to cast the pearls before swine. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Literally.
Yeah.
You want to save the good wine until the end. All that stuff is saying the same thing. It just keeps on saying it, keeps on saying it, keeps on saying it. That's why I sound like I'm talking in circles, but it's just like it works over here, works over there, works over here, works over. That's how you know it's true, because it just works everywhere.
So there's so many things too, speaking of this feast, the wedding, the kingdom to come, all these different things, the 1,000 years of peace. And you brought up tonight a bunch of times, like, what good would it have been if we didn't actually go through these processes? We didn't learn that the yoke of the law would bring death. and yet the works of righteousness will beget righteousness, and then that those will begin to shine and shine forth, and you're not going to be hidden under a bushel or put under a bed. They're going to be put out high for everyone to see that walks into the house. We are in those times now. If anyone's just tuning in and all this has just been like super over you, like we're going whoa, 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 whoa. All I can say is just, I'll put the link again in the chat. We still got, I guess, close to 20 minutes. I don't know where else you want to take this, Robert, continuing on with the light study or anything else. But here's again, if you start on the website, scriptural-truth.com, I just put the link in. If you go to MP3s, I would suggest just going through every single link that Robert's got here. So,
well, let's just say, I mean, look, I'll spell it out I'll do a few and just spell it out as I go. The first thing to understand is that there are two levels of understanding of the scripture. There's the flesh and there is the spirit. The spirit is couched in fleshly terms so that the fleshly terms will be understood on the level of the flesh for a certain length of time, at which point the understanding of the hidden meaning within those words will become obvious, will become known, will become shouted from the rooftops, etc. And then the spiritual meaning will be unleashed. And then that's going to spark a spiritual awakening among Christians where they realize that not only do they have the revelation of the Old Testament and the revelation of the New Testament, but that the revelation of the Old and the New Testaments together come together to show that there will be a further revelation still, where it talks about, for example, how the Spirit will come and set things right, that John the Baptist will come at the end of time, so to speak, a someone who functions or some entity that functions as that and lead us into all truth. The idea is that there will come a teaching, that there will be I will give you a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to withstand, right? That the idea is that you're given power, the idea is that you're given authority, the idea is that you're given wisdom, the idea is that you're given, that it's your time. He's had his turn, and now it's ours. It's our turn to pull this Babylon down, so to speak, to strike at the roots of the trees, so to speak. When it says in Gospel of Thomas 29, it says that the flesh came into being because of the spirit. That's amazing. If the spirit came into existence because of the body, that's really amazing. But I'm amazed at how such great wealth has been placed into this poverty. So again, what is the parallel between wealth and spirit and flesh and poverty? Because again, wealth and spirit, the wealth is the spirit. The poverty is the flesh. So the level of the flesh is poverty. The level of the spirit is wealth. So if you want to come into the true wealth, that is to say, you come into the spiritual understanding. And you see, if the flesh came into existence because of the spirit, that meant that when he was going to show us the spiritual things, he first couched them in fleshly terms. These treasures are in earthen vessels. You see, the vessels are the words, and the treasure is the higher level meaning, right? And so that in and of itself is amazing. And then it says, and if the spirit came into existence because of the body or because of the dead flesh or whatever, the idea is that now that the spirit is unleashed, that is, in a real translation, it actually says it is a wonder of wonders. I'm kind of disagreeing with this translation. It says that the flesh came into existence because of the spirit. That is a wonder, right? And that's I think a better word in English, because the idea that you could cram all of that higher level stuff into lower level stuff is pretty amazing. That's a neat little trick, right? Couching like everything in parables.
Zip file.
Right? But that's the flesh coming into existence because of the spirit, because that's where he wanted to hide the spiritual terms. And it says, and then this is speaking to us in our age, if the spirit came into existence because of the flesh, right? That is to say, if the spiritual meaning then leaves the flesh and becomes spiritual, in other words, you get those eyes to see and you get those ears to hear, and you get up on your rooftops and you start communicating this with the rest of the world, right? And everybody else gets eyes to see and everybody else gets ears to hear, and it catches on and people see it, it becomes a thing, it becomes a happening, right? Then, the answer is obvious, right? But then he goes on to comment, he says, but I'm amazed at how such wealth has been placed in this poverty. He's even amazed himself, right? Because the one is the wonder that the spirit could be couched in the flesh, but the wonder that is within that wonder, the wonder of wonders, is the idea that it has the ability to set us free. It has the ability to set us free. So that's just verse 29. And then we talked about the three. Where there are three deities, there are divine. Where there are two or one, I am with them. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, what it means is it has to do with the idea. We've used the terms the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, or whatever. The idea is that just in the same way that there's the Father and there's the testament of the Father, so to speak, titular, and the Son and the testament of the Son represents, the Son of Man. And that represents a dispensation. So that's two, right? So a person who is a Christian has kind of two testaments, two ways of understanding things, right? And the Jew, let's say, or the Hebrew has one, right? So when he says he's with them, it just means that, like, in the Old Testament, he's prophesied, and in the New Testament, he's prophesied. So he's with them. You know what I'm saying? But it says when there are three deities, it says they are divine, right? So that has to do with them drinking from the fountain, and that's like that has further explanation here too. Let me see.
I become totally and wholly intoxicated, as if I.
Well, but again, this has a parallel in saying 13. With Thomas's confession, Jesus says to his disciples, if you were to compare me to someone, who would you say that I'm like? And Simon Peter, who we know represents the church, you are like a just angel. The idea is that the church sees him in terms of his, his divine nature, let's say, his power, the power to raise the dead or to heal the sick or whatever. They see him as sort of something, heavenly or whatever. They see him in that light. And then Matthew, who again, I think the tax collector or whatever, that he was basically representative of the Jews or whatever in this particular instance. He says, you are like a wise philosopher. And that has to do with the idea that they called him rabbi and they saw him as a teacher. They always referred to him as teacher this and teacher that. They thought of him as a wise philosopher, right? And that Thomas, who represents the third generation, those to come, the twin, if you will, those who will be like him, in other words, the elect. He says, teacher, I'm completely unable to say whom you are like, right? Because what it's saying is that he can't really quite put it into words. The idea is that he exists in such a way, in such a space, as to have power over reality, to couch the heavenly in the fleshly and to appear in the flesh and have everybody see things on the level of the flesh while he is yet transcendent and beyond that. And how does he put it into words? And so it's explained to him. It says, well, I'm not your teacher, because in order for him to have that understanding or whatever, he's learned this firsthand from the spring that he's measured out. And what comes out of the spring? Okay, what is a spring? A spring is water that comes out from the earth. And water is the word. So it's a word that comes out of earthly understanding. So you're able to drink from that, right? And so because of that, you're able to see this insight. And so you are beyond these other people. And so then, as a consequence of that insight, he takes him aside and he tells him three things. And we're not told explicitly what these three things are, but the idea is that where we have three deities, the idea is that there are three dispensations. So he told him, look, there's going to be three things. There's going to be three revelations, right? Something that Thomas probably already knew and already intuited, which is why he probably was asked this question. And he says, when he came back to his companions, which again are Matthew and Peter, which would basically would represent the Jews and the Christians, he says, what did they ask? He says, well, if I were to tell you one of the things, he said to me, because they already know about two of them, they don't know about the one, they don't know about the third one, right? He says, well, if I were to tell you one of these things, you would pick up stones and cast them at me. All right, so what are the stones? Well, the stones, okay, stones are related to bread in terms of terminology. Who, if your son asked him for a bread, would give him a stone? So you see, stone and bread are used sort of, and in that sense. And when he was being tempted out in the wilderness, Satan says, "Hey, why don't you turn these stones into bread?" Right? And he says, "Well, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Right? So, um, it, it not to get too far off into that topic, but the idea is that a stone is a testament. And in Revelation, there's a stone to come, that those who overcome will be given a white stone. And on that stone written a new name. What is that name? Well, what are we called? It is for the elect, I said, and took up my parable concerning them, right? And it's only available to those who accept it, because it's a matter of acceptance. So the idea is that you're given a name, which is the elect. You're given a stone, which is a testament. It's white, which means it's pure, right? And it's holy, right? And so you only you know it, right? And so if you're hip to it, you know it, right? And so they're going to pick up their stones, which are their testaments, right? And then a fire, which is the judgment, because there's two kinds of fires. There's heavenly fire and there's earthly fire. The heavenly fire is the fire of the spirit. The earthly fire is the fire of destruction. And the idea is that the fire is going to come out of those stones. That is to say, their scriptures are going to turn on them. This was prophesied of in the Ark of the Covenant. This was prophesied in the types of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? This is all going to backfire. There were three things. There always have been three things, right? I told you from the beginning, do it according to this design. The three layers in Noah's Ark, the three main patriarchs, the three items in the Ark of the Covenant, James and Peter and John at the Transfiguration, etc. Just on and on and on. There's always been these threes, and that the two testaments, the two stones, in other words, that they would pick up to throw at him. In other words, they would use the scriptures against Thomas, right? They'll testify against the Jews and the Christians, is what this is saying. It says fire will come out of the stones and burn you up or consume you, right? And how will they be consumed? Well, we've already consumed them. Look, they're shouting canon. They're shouting tradition. We've undermined the canon. We've undermined their they're burnt up. They're already burnt. You see what I'm saying? They don't have a weapon that they can form against us, and so that's just another one. I mean, you just about pick another one at random. It always tells the same story.
They tried with cutting off the head of John the Baptist. They tried to stop what was coming, and it was foretold that would take place, but the axe was laid at the root. At that time, Satan was already undermined. It was just the time for the meal to work its way through.
Well, what worked before was what was used again. You see, at the time, because look, why is Jude quoting Enoch? Why is he potentially quoting the testaments of the 12 patriarchs? Why is Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter of faith, mind you, alluding to Second Maccabees? Why is it alluding to the martyrdom of Isaiah? Why is that? Why when you talk about the rich man and Lazarus or whatever, why is that parallel what's written in the book of Enoch? Why are these references being made to books outside of the canon, right? It's so that people who get this insight will recognize that those are there for that reason, to show that the canon is artificial and that it's a construct, so that fire comes out of their stones, that fire comes out of their own words, in other words, to burn them up and to destroy them. You see what I'm saying? Anyone who has ears should hear. Right? I mean, that's the idea, is that when you get the ear to hear and you get the eye to see what is beyond what you've heard and what's beyond what you've seen, then you have that. I mean, you can just about pick it up, any of them. Let's see if I find another one.
I think we're now approaching the 2-hour mark. We gave people so much tonight. My favorite part was the white stone, the new name written upon it, and then shining like the stars in the sky. These are the things that I've been focused on, as well as the inspired poetic language. I've just felt it strongly. I'm really glad that you came on tonight, Robert, to continue to shed light upon these topics. I think anybody that tuned in tonight has a really good chance of, digging into this stuff now. Having found us, we've got other videos with Robert. We go into the detail. We've even, read the same books, the Robert's like you had put the spiritual words into the Book of Thomas on the free PDF
yeah.
right here. It's right all here on the PDF, as well as understanding basically so many of the parables. Robert's gone through. If you go to the tab on here that says free PDFs, you'll find Joseph and the Carpenter, Sign of Jonah, Sabbath, Sin in the Garden, Spiritual Keys, Understanding the Parables. These are all things that the hidden words, the Jubilees, the Book of Enoch. He's got it all written here. My favorite, basically, the parable of the tares, the parable of the lamp and the bushel, the parable of the sower, the parable of the hidden treasure, all of these different parables, the parable of the leaven. You really want to read these, because Yahushua was literally the living parable. And what Robert has given us, what he's put down here, is enough for us to dig into for almost ever. There's no end. It's the same thing that you were saying earlier, Robert. When you know that what is from the Father, you will know that it has no beginning and no end. There's no way to debunk it. You can't stand outside of it. It just simply is. And once we can,
It's a revelation. It's a revelation.
Retrospectively understood.
It awakens something inside of you, and that's when you know. It is objective and it is subjective.
Mm-hmm. And you've completely brought everybody to that level, and for me, it's just like music to my ears. I can't get enough of it. I just hope other people can get inspired too, because so many people just want to go around bashing Christianity, bashing the scriptures, saying all these things because of what the church has done, because it was undermined, because of the things that happened. But there's not one religion, there's not one school of thought in the world that is able to unpack a mystery such as so beautiful that we learn that light heavenly things were couched upon fleshly things. And through these parables, we can actually understand that we're divinely created spiritual beings that are going to actually, this world is going to pass away, and we're going to keep going with this knowledge. This truth will never die. So if you've eaten this, you are eternal, right?
Well, again, it's just a matter of, do you see it? Because it's there. And, some people will want to see this and some people won't. But I think that it's going to gain strength. It's going to gain traction. I've been doing this for a long time. Sometimes I think I lack the charisma or whatever to be a leader or whatever. But there's a world full of people who understand this. And sooner or later, it's going to seep out into the public awareness. I mean, these books have gotten more and more popular. They have entered into the conversation. People all over the world are reacting to these things in one way, form, or fashion. Whether they're affirming them or denying them, they're having to grapple with them. This really needs to move up to the next level. I think with hundreds and thousands and potentially millions of people believing these things, in the near future, it would be enough to shift the balance. It would be enough to have this conversation. And I think once we get this conversation going, it's going to it's going to unfold. But it's going to be a matter of people's growing awareness, I think. Although I don't rule out the possibility that God may have something else up his sleeve as far as all this is concerned. But I do believe that at some point that the paradigm will shift and that people will, take the ball and run with it as they're supposed to.
We agree, Robert, and thank you for joining us once again.
It's always a pleasure.
It was great.
Yeah. Great job.
I will play us out. We should be back on Wednesday, barring something happens. But again, everybody, please, I put the links for Robert's YouTube channel and for his scriptural-truth.com website with all the different, that website right there has everything you need to, I've spent 10 years researching it, and backdating it and verifying it and understanding it, and all of you can do it if I can do it. I'm just like you guys. Again, Robert, man, it's always such a pleasure to have you on. You're so humble. You out humble a humbleness. You are quite the character.
I have a realistic understanding of who it is I'm dealing with. So
you are a very humble man, and you always we don't like the transliteration of the word bless. We've switched it to be more. And really, Robert, you inspire us to be more every day. I don't want to give you too much credibility here because I happen to think you're going to have heavenly treasures. So I'm not going to sit here and build you up. You're one of the most humble people I know. And I'm really thankful that we're able to share this time together, because, this is what church is to me. Digging into the scriptures and finding the good soil and finding the treasure. That's what I want to be a part of. And I feel like everyone here in the chat super loved the hangout tonight. I'm sure people on Facebook are going to appreciate it. Robert, thank you, man. And, I can't wait for more. I would like you to read the Book of the Cave of Treasures. It's my I submit the question to you because it's one of my favorite books, and it also does away with the serpent seed doctrine, where there's some sort of Cain or Satan is the father and all this stuff, and that's why that book really needs to be put back in its place. I'll let both of you guys say something before I end, and only you hear this on Yahushua News Network.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. Like I said, anytime, it's just doing what we got to do. We got to get the word out there. And everybody who hears this, again, not to push too hard on this or belabor the point too much, but you can always share. You can always do a part. If you have a good reading voice, read some of this stuff out. It's not about me, and it's not about Ronnie or anybody else. It has to do with what is your level of participation in this? Because everything is written on the pages of eternity. You know what I'm saying? Your contribution will never be erased. You know what I'm saying? The good that you do will be somewhere permanently written down. You know what I'm saying? So for your own sake and for your own spiritual growth, that's how you grow. That's how you develop. You got to put your hand to the plow.
Great words. Thank you so much, Robert. We will see you all soon on Yahushua News Network. Thank you.